With bulky items, parcel is not available as an option, so it turns into an international freight shipment, right? If it's an international sale especially. But even domestic sales, it's a freight shipment. So those tend to be a lot more complicated. There's a lot more at stake.
Robert, what's the biggest mistake that you see when companies, brands trying to ship large or heavy products?
I see a lot of companies.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce Coffee Break podcast. Today we want to talk about bulky shipping and shipping high-ticket items. So if you're selling big, bulky and high-ticket products like fitness gear, furniture, electronics, then you already know shipping can get messy very fast. Hidden costs, surprise duties, complex returns, that's easy to get wrong. And when that happens, your profits and your customer experience with that too will take a hit. So today we talk about that. We want to dive deep into this. And as always, I have an expert with me. Today, joining me on the show is Robert Khachatryan. He is the founder and CEO of Freight Global Logistics. He started the company from his LA department during the 2008 crash and turned it into a global leader in shipping big, bulky and high-value goods. Robert is the trusted voice in logistics, a frequent speaker at top industry events and advisor at the USC's Global Supply Chain Institute. So let's dive right into it. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Klaus.
Robert, what's the biggest mistake that you see when companies, brands trying to ship large or heavy products?
I see a lot of companies default to offering free shipping because they can't really figure out how to calculate shipping for big and bulky items. You see this in the United States for domestic sales, and you see this in international as well. People either don't offer it at all, or it's some kind of a flat shipping where they often take a hit because it turns out to be more expensive than they quote on the shopping cart level. I would say that's the biggest pitfall.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the cost structure, the hidden costs when it comes to big and expensive and bulky products. Where do we need to look at? Where does it start and what's involved in there?
You know, when you sell small items that can be handled by parcel carriers like, FedEx, UPS, DHL, it's very easy because it's just an API call, some kind of an integration where you provide the carrier measurements of the box and weight and destination, and they return you a rate, and then basically they honor that rate. With bulky items, parcel is not available as an option, so it turns into an international freight shipment, right? If it's an international sale especially. But even domestic sales, it's a freight shipment. So those tend to be a lot more complicated. There's a lot more at stake. If something's wrong, it's generally more money at stake. If you think about it, the parcel, if it's not priced correctly, you might go from, let's say, $5 to $10 in shipping cost. Whereas, big, heavy item, you might end up paying hundreds of dollars more, if not thousands, right? So the stakes are much higher just because of the cost of shipping is so much higher, just a factor of the weight, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's not only the shipping itself, there's also taxes, duties, and other things that come into play when you ship internationally. Talk about this a little bit more so that our listeners can understand what costs are actually coming to the sales price.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges. Again, to some extent, it's a function of larger amounts because if you're selling larger items, bulkier items, they tend to be more expensive than, say, a trinket that fits in an envelope. So again, and the mistakes are very costly, right? So if you're shipping something to the EU, for example, or UK, you're talking about a 21% VAT. So how do you calculate it? How do you make sure it's calculated properly? And that's on the easier side because, it's typically a blanket rate across the country. Whereas if you're trying to calculate import duties, now you're getting into all sorts of complicated customs classifications. And there you can have a lot of challenges. Think of all the recent news with tariffs in the United States. How do you calculate the correct tariff? How do you collect it? That can be very burdensome. The problem is, in the same category of products, you might have multiple classifications, and then they might have different duty rates. And when you're shipping something big and bulky, the last thing you want is it arriving to the destination country and the customer refusing it because they get like an unexpected duty bill, or either because you didn't calculate it or estimate it to begin with, they had no idea they have to pay this, or if you calculate it but it was incorrect, right? So, if you sell like a $10,000 machine to a customer in Europe and it arrives and all of a sudden they get a call and they're told they have to pay, $2,000-$3,000 in duties and taxes, that could be very shocking, right? So I guess it's a big challenge to solve.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think our listeners can understand this is a lot of moving parts in there to get this right at the end of the day. And it might be overwhelming and it might be not even within the expertise of a seller out there. And that's where you come into play. How do you help brands out there to figure out how it works and to make it seamless?
There are generally well-established solutions for international sales and duty calculation even, and certainly tax collection and remittance, again, for smaller items and smaller amounts. When you get into the world of large and expensive items, there's very few solutions that exist. So a lot of brands try to solve this themselves, and it definitely can become burdensome. What we do is, we believe we can sort of, to use a cliche, we can democratize this process. We can make this available to smaller brands who don't necessarily have presence in all the countries. They don't have local, taxable entities, right? So what our company does essentially is will connect to a brand's shopping cart and will enable sales in 45 plus countries where we're able to calculate instantly duty rates, tax rates, shipping rates, both economy options and expedited options. So if you want to, let's say you're a US brand and you want to sell your exercise equipment in Singapore, we can basically, our technology allows you to, if the buyer is on your shopping cart and they enter a Singapore address, we can instantly calculate duties, taxes, and shipping, let's say by air and ocean, right? So, they pay, they check out, and essentially you can sell in Singapore now without having a Singapore entity, without having to collect taxes in Singapore, remit taxes in Singapore. And that's right now across 45 different countries. So typically when we talk to brands that sell large items online, I mean, it's astounding. Almost none of them sell internationally because of these challenges, right? Like none, zero. The only ones that sell internationally are the ones that have distribution, right? They have distributing partners, they have established relationships, or they have branches in those countries. And we wanted to mimic that for all the other brands that, haven't reached that level yet, or maybe don't want to have like taxation representation in a particular country.
Now, I can understand that a lot of brands shy back from this because it's a very complex process. I mean, you need expertise like you have to solve this riddle, this issue. And I have a friend of mine, she's selling heavy furnitures, and exactly the problem, not going internationally. Well, there's a big market waiting out there because of these complexities that are behind. Now, for a brand, if they think selling internationally with these products, what's the first step to get started?
I think some general research around their particular product or product categories and the destination countries. For example, if you're selling electronics, you have different in voltages in different countries, power outlets and things like that. That would be the first thing to tackle. We have American brands that provide adapters, for example, with their international shipments, but we also run into products that require completely new electronics, right? So it's a 110 volt thing that just doesn't work. You cannot just downgrade, step down from 220 volt with a adapter. It requires a complete rework and it becomes a separate product. So that would be an extreme case of, okay, you just can't sell your current product. There are, if you're selling items that have some kind of a brand licensing, a good place to look is, do you have the authority to sell that product in that country? You may have Disney licensing, for example, in UK, which may not extend to Europe or may not extend to United States. So you want to make sure basically you can sell your product for IP restrictions, trademarks, and so on and so forth. And there's also, compliance, right? So different countries have different compliance rules. There is, the more sort of niche and technical the product, the more this may be relevant. Furniture, as an example, generally is a pretty easy thing to ship internationally. Regulations pretty standard. US and Europe have standards around how flammable something can be, but those generally are pretty standardized versus, let's say cosmetics, which may require registration locally and might have different standards. So I would definitely start with some kind of research to understand, can you actually sell your product in other countries, and which countries are those? So you may be able to sell one product in one country, another product in another country. Our solution actually allows you to customize and say, I want these products enabled for this country, or I want to block this particular product in this country for whatever reason. But that's definitely where I would start.
Mm-hmm. No, makes perfect sense. I mean, having a bit of market research and a feeling on what's sellable in a country, it makes perfect sense. Now, who's your perfect customer?
Yeah, so by design, brands that sell either bulky items or brands that sell smaller items in large quantities to the same customer, where it basically amounts to a bulky shipment. I think unique items, definitely, that would be in demand in other countries, and brands that have social media marketing campaign which results in international demand. Most importantly, I think brands that have the appetite and the ambition to go international, but don't necessarily want to go the traditional route of finding local distributors, going to trade shows, investing in inventory, and doing that for multiple countries. So basically, brands that want to expand internationally, but are not looking for necessarily establishing international presence physically themselves. That's the ideal customer.
I think there lies a huge opportunity for a lot of brands in the US to expand internationally. And with a partner like yours on the side who does basically the complicated stuff, it's a good combination. Now, how do you charge for your service?
That's the beauty of it, because we are at our core a logistics company, right? So our service is actually the logistics, the movement of goods, the customs, clearance, processing, and that's where we make our money. So the brand basically doesn't pay for the solution, right? So the buyer, when they pay for shipping, we arrange the shipping. So that's where we get our revenue from. So in most cases, there is no cost to the brand to enable the solution, right? Unless it's some kind of a custom integration or requires a lot of custom coding work, then but those would be very rare, and most shopping carts we can readily connect to without any expense.
Okay, no, that's very straightforward then. Robert, before our chat comes to an end today, is there anything you want to share with our listeners that we haven't covered yet?
I would encourage brands to explore international markets. We very often talk to brands who tends to be a little bit timid about it, and we understand it's complex, it's scary. There's regulation and compliance and things like that. But with the solution like ours, we really make it easy. We take over most of the compliance, the taxation, all of those things, and the brand is very shielded from any international exposure. So having all that at hand, I think I definitely encourage brands to explore expanding outside of their local markets.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a win-win situation for the brand and for the customer. Where can people go and find out more about you guys?
Freightright.com. That's freight, FREIGHT, RIGHT.com. Everything about the company is there. We do many other things. You can narrow down to the e-commerce section of the website, and there's a lot of information there on how this works, what problems we solve, and ways to contact us or just subject matter experts in all of those fields to start a conversation.
Perfect. I will put the links in the show notes, then you're just one click away. Robert, thanks so much for giving us an overview of how you do big, bulky, and expensive item internationally and make it easy for everyone involved. And I hope a lot of people will reach out to you and expand their business internationally. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Klaus.